The only thing I'm going to say about Tom is when I first met him, I asked him one question, and that was, will he vote to uphold the Republican platform as it stands? And he smiled at me and he looked down and he said, you mean the one I helped write? So anyways, without further ado, this is going to be our next U.S. Senator, and I'd like you all to welcome Tom Del Beccaro.
How are you tonight? Is this loud enough, or do you want me to use the microphone? Is that better? There you go. You know, I'm actually the sixth of 8 kids, so usually my voice is loud enough, or I never would have been heard. Let me get the microphone. I'm tangled. So it's nice to be, I think I'm living in LA now. I'm from Northern California, about 30 miles east of San Francisco. That's just far enough away. So that, you know when they talk about building the wall? I think it's around San Francisco is what it is. Really what they're referring to. I thought I'd introduce myself a little bit to you about my background and then pick up on something that she was talking about and talk about this Senate race, how you can help, and then answer a lot of questions because my voice is going, so I'd rather hear from you a little bit than just me. My background is, my family got started in politics a long, long time ago. In fact, my parents were both Italian Catholic conservatives in Chicago in the 50s, otherwise known as unicorns. And then they moved east, they went to New York and helped start the Conservative Party of New York in the late 60s. Do you remember when this was occurring? And elected James Buckley to the U.S. Senate, the only conservative party member ever elected to the U.S. Senate. Interestingly enough, his catchphrase was, isn't it time we had a senator? So I'm going to ask you at the end of this, isn't it time that we had a senator? My father got me started really early on. I met Richard Nixon as a 7-year-old in 1968. Anyone else here meet him as a 7-year-old?
That's about a 17-year-old.
There you go. Eisenhower as a 7-year-old. Okay, you got me on that one. My father served on the UN World Food Council, so he used to travel the world and come home and tell all the stories about how great socialism was. That's a joke, just trying to see if you're playing along. But he would come home and obviously talk to us about this. I used to watch the Sunday shows, and then my father got me reading. As a 12-year-old, I started reading The Economist magazine. Anybody here remember that, right? And then also he had me reading Foreign Affairs magazine. Do you remember that? And then when I was 16, he really started me reading. Anybody here remember Will and Ariel Durant's Story of Civilization, the 12 volumes? Yes, 11,000 pages. They started me when I was 16. I bought my own set at 19 and finished it at 24. And that really had, along with reading Free to Choose, a big impact on who I am philosophically. So briefly, I'll tell you what the Durants did was their writing became known as historical philosophy, and what their intent was always to place things in context. And what I mean by that is you see the part in light of the whole. So you'd see the rise and fall of civilizations and understand things, mainly how much history really does repeat itself, right? How many of you have heard the phrase, history repeats itself, right? Everyone? Did you know that that is really only been accepted for about 250 years? Did you know that? A little bit more than that. Prior to that, there wasn't a lot of books, but they generally thought there was no point studying the past because it was different people, and they figured there was nothing to learn from that. You know what they call those people now? Washington Democrats. So if you read enough history, you realize these rhythms of history, where governments start out fairly small, even if they are a king or a queen. And then over time, bureaucracies grow, the government gets really large, the taxes get really large, regulations grow, debt grows, and then the civilization begins its decline along with its stagnating economy. Does this sound familiar to anyone? And this is actually something that's been repeated time and time again throughout history. And so I, as a 17, 18-year-old, became a conservative, not because my parents were, because if you see this in action, you wonder why people are intent on repeating these same kinds of mistakes over and over again. And I also, all the way back then, became a proponent of tax reform. Because why have these big, complicated, heavy, burdensome taxes if it shrinks the economy? Don't you want a vibrant economy that actually produces more? Now, Judy said something very interesting, and it's really encapsulates why I'm running. She said how important this election is, right? Didn't she say this is the most important election? You know when they really started saying those kind of things? You hear that every year, right? This is the most important election. And if you met Eisenhower, you know actually back then they didn't say that so much. It really started to pick up as government started getting bigger and bigger, and it's not a coincidence as to why. This truly is the most important election in history, mathematically. And what I mean by that is our federal government is now larger than ever, with more powers than ever. So whoever we elect, especially after this last president who disregarded our constitutional system so wantonly, whoever we elect next will have enormous powers. In fact, from the city council level all the way to the federal level, our government spends now $6 trillion a year. Just to give you a sense from where Calvin Coolidge was, if you adjust for population and money, Calvin Coolidge's government was about 150 billion in today's dollars. The federal government today is about 3.9 trillion dollars. We've changed dramatically, and with that, lots of powers. And with that, also lots of division, right? A government that does 10 things will find 10 groups of people to fight about those 10 things and everybody else to pay for it. But a government that does endless things, like we have today, will find endless competitors over these regulations, not wanting to be regulated, not wanting to be taxed, endless competitors to get the spoils of governments, right? If government's spending $6 trillion, you know what that means? That means someone's getting $6 trillion. And when people hand out money, people show up to get that money. And so we have this intense, this intense competition which winds up dividing us. And especially to this time as well, we have a stagnant economy. Why is that? Why is the economy for the last 7 years only growing 1.6%? Now, if you listen to the Democrats, it's because we're not spending enough money, right? If you listen to others, they'll tell you it's simply a function of a economy that goes through cycles. You've heard that, right? Cycle up, cycle down. But in fact, it's certainly not that we're spending too little money. Because if government spending could produce prosperity, then we must be in heaven. Anybody think this is heaven, by the way, the current government spending, right? In fact, government spending is 36% of the economy. How much more would it take to create prosperity? In a minute, I'll tell you that it's actually inverse. The more you spend, the less prosperity you get. Federal government spending $3.8 trillion, I told you that. They're running $600 billion deficits. We send them records amount of money, and they still can't balance the budget. Who here thinks if we sent them more, they would decide to balance the budget? Right? It's not going to happen. Now, this total size of government, or what I like to, thank you very much, Judy, what I like to refer to is the total government burden. And this is a really important concept for us to get to help explain what's going on to others. Because there are many people in the middle and on the left who really think that, well, just a little bit more government spending. So I mentioned the $6 trillion, that's 36% of the economy, right? Over a third is just government spending. But it doesn't end there, because all of us spend a lot of money either through buying products or directly to deal with all the government regulations. Indeed, the cost of those regulations are over $2.5 trillion a year from the local level all the way to the top. That, when you combine that with the 36% of the economy, for spending nearly half of the economy is government related. Now, how many of you think that's sustainable? It actually has a really big impact on long-term growth. In fact, once any society gets much past a third, their long-term growth potential goes down because you're taking too much of the apple and leaving too little for the private sector to succeed. In fact, you're sapping the private sector. You know who's above 50%? Western Europe. In fact, France, on this new index that I'm working out with my economic advisor, Stephen Moore, this total government burden index, is above 70%. Italy, those countries are above 60%. How many of you have been to Spain recently? Anyone? Now, if you're 30 years old or younger in Spain, for the last decade, you've faced an unemployment rate in excess of a third, sometimes as high as 41%. And if you're unemployed for long periods of time as a youngster, you know what that means. That delays your ability to build wealth over time. In fact, it's developing a permanent underclass. But that's what happened when government takes too much from the private sector. Because surely by now we all agree that if this whole government spending notion, right? We had a weak economy in 2008, and how did the Democrats respond? Right? The stimulus package, cash for clunkers, right? They even tried to tell us Obamacare. QE, what are we on? QE 1008, where essentially the central bank tried to ease money. You know what ease money means? Yeah, essentially print it. All of these things don't work. Why? Because the private sector portion remains too small. Too small to thrive. The burden on it to take care of the government side is simply too high. And yet the Democrats still think we should do more. Now I'm going to give you a tough economic lesson for people to understand. You know, I write for Forbes, and I write about economics and tax policy, so I'm going to give you a demonstration here that lets you see how the left views taxes. Because you've all heard that, or maybe you haven't. There is this theory among the left that if you tax money and give it to government, there's an additional multiplier effect. That when government spends the money, it creates more economic activity than when you. This is true. They came up with this. So I'm going to demonstrate this to you, okay? So, in my right hand is the government with some of your money already, okay? In my left hand, this is the private sector with money, right? Your money. Now the left thinks, these economists and in Washington, that only if they have your money, the economy will increase greater. We're going to tax you right here, okay? You're watching closely. We're taking your money, giving it to the government. The government will waste a little. happens. Now here's the really hard part of are you ready for the hard part of the economic lesson? How many of you think there's now more water in the 2 glasses than when I started? Nobody. No. In fact, the money to be spent, taxing and giving to one, does not increase the size of the economy. It shifts it in inefficient manners. So, what's your first name? Joanne. If I took half your money, in addition to arresting me before I got far away, your economy would go down by a half, and mine would go up by the same amount. Yours went down. And there is no growth, right? Right. That's the point of it. And then the other way I express this very difficult economic lesson is 10 words. And you can tell this to your friends. 10 words. When the government takes your money, you don't have it. They don't get that in Sacramento. They don't get that in Washington. To bring this all home, we need to realize that we're already at a point where government is too large. So the next time you hear from a politician that we need just a little bit more money to work out this or that. Yes, it may be true if we did a local tax tomorrow that fixed a street here in Claremont, and maybe with that infrastructure, that area of town or the town in general would do better. But overall, if you're thinking about the economy as a whole, every additional dime is like too many packs on the mule trying to move up the hill, and it's already at a standstill or losing ground. And the only way to get out of this downward spiral or this weakness in growth is to do what? Well, it's to reduce the spending at the federal level, lest we turn into Detroit, and to increase the private sector. And that is why I exist, to talk to people about the private sector. Because we must expand it. It must be more vibrant. That percentage of the economy must rise. Now, how do we do this? There's only one way to do it on a sustained basis. It is not to give money to government. It is for you to keep the money and to invest it, start companies and the like yourself. And we must give you the incentive to do that. Because government destroys incentives all the time. Just the tax code is a bad incentive. You know, it's 77,000 pages of an annotated tax code. Has anybody read that? No, not even my father made me read 77,000 pages. Now, who is that a monument to? It's not a monument to everyday people. That's a monument to who? Lobbyists, government officials, Congress. Because corporate welfare at its worst is embodied in that code. They get an exemption, they get a page in there. Do you have any pages in the tax code? Didn't you hire a lobbyist when you had a chance? No. In fact, the code is so onerous, and remember it's a historical maxim that every complication in the law helps the rich at the expense of the poor because they can afford someone to figure it out while the rest of us have to fend for ourselves. So how do we grow this private sector? We leave money in the private sector, and that means one and one thing only. We must reduce the tax burden. We must reduce the cost of compliance with the tax code. We must allow people to keep their money. That's why I'm the only U.S. Senate candidate in America with his own flat tax. The only one. And not coincidentally, I'm the only candidate ever, I think in American history, to have the support of Art Laffer, Larry Kudlow, Stephen Moore, and Steve Forbes for my tax code. Thank you. Because we must win this argument. What I just told you about, we must win this argument. We cannot lose this argument to Bernie Sanders. A man who didn't have a job until he was 40 and now thinks we should have an 81% tax rate. Don, if I took 81% of your money on the marginal top end, you wouldn't have it, your economy would shrink. Reagan won the prosperity argument, and we have been losing it ever since. Because every generation must understand how it works. Now, moving on from that, I want to talk to you about one other quick subject, and then take your questions. And that is the whole water issue, which is central to this state because our economic growth in this state is being held back as well. For the same reason, because the government has effectively limited the amount of water. It is a fixed pie. And whenever there's a fixed pie economically, what happens? We compete against each other and divide yourself. North versus south, you're well aware of this. Agriculture versus manufacturing versus, this is how government works. They specialize in creating these divisions. Now, none of this has to occur. It's occurring because, not because we don't have too much water, it's occurring because we have a surplus of environmentalists. It turns out. And how does that work? It's pretty simple. They, without your knowledge, pass a lot of these restrictions without the great knowledge of Californians, and we divide ourselves by being in the Central Valley and saying, give us more, being in Palm Springs, give us more, stay away from what we have. Up north, they fight a separate battle. We must have a comprehensive approach to winning this battle because we need to educate voters. In fact, the best way that we should look at elections as the minority party is exactly how Howard Jarvis looked at elections back in the late 70s. You will recall Howard Jarvis got Prop 13 through and changed the world. Because Reagan rode that tax-cutting coattails into the presidency and did great things. Without it, you could make the argument he may not have made it in that time, and in that place. So how did Howard Jarvis do this? Because we must remember in the late 70s, Al Gore had yet to create the internet. Right? You're laughing, but you know, people often say that Al Gore said that he invented the internet. That's not what he said. Well, Blitzer talked about this later, and he point blank asked him, and Al said he created the internet. You know, to invent is human, but to create is, well, we're in a church anyway, aren't we? And then Walt Blitzer said he couldn't believe Gore said it, so he asked him straight-faced again, so he could correct himself. And Al just charged out with it again and said, no, I created it. It was also Jarvis's accomplishment done before what? It's 1978. There's no cell phones, just the phone. Remember, on the wall? So how did he do it? He did it in meetings like this. He did it by talking across party lines, across demographics. And that is what we have to do again. And there's another element to this. All the time I'm asked on radio or otherwise, how can they vote for Republican initiatives but not Republican candidates? The answer is in the law, actually. An initiative by law can only be about one subject matter and propose one subject matter fix. It's about an idea. And then we run statewide candidates who have no ideas or no solutions. And so what are voters to do if they really don't know what this, if you're just hearing platitudes, you fall back on party lines. If you hear plans, you might cross them. That's why there's a very specific tax plan, a very 7-page water plan. It's on my website. A complete immigration plan. You know exactly where I stand, on the Second Amendment or on foreign policy. We must provide ideas. If we reach enough people with practical solutions, they will take a look at it because they're upset. I'm telling you, the water issue, no matter where you go, and for different reasons. Way up north, they're angry about taking down 3 dams to help fish. In the Central Valley, we know what a 3-inch bait fish does to angler people. In Palm Springs, where they have 100 years of water, because they manage it so well, they don't want it to be taken away. San Diego wants out of its restrictions because they've done so much of the right thing, including desalination plant. The state won't let them off the hook. At the end of the day, the minority party becomes the majority party in any one election of time, not by being the other party, but by providing something better than the other party, a practical solution. So that's why I'm so specific. I'm pleased with the endorsements we've got from the people that I think you respect. I'm endorsed by the Howard Jarvis Taxpayers Association, Lou Euler's National Tax Limitation. This week it hasn't even been announced, but this is a good place as any to announce it. We'll go public with it soon, but I did get the California Pro-Life Council endorsement. And you may or may not know that my mother, who recently passed just 3 weeks ago, was recognized by the Pope for her pro-life work. And I know that if I hadn't gotten that endorsement, I'd never be able to see her again and hold my head high in that respect. But also I mentioned people like boards, Tom McClintock, of course, supports me, Mike Antonovich supports me as well. But I need your help. Elections are about 3 things: message, messengers, and money. The 3 M's. Message. Say something. Tell people what they can expect. I tell people that if you want someone to follow you, it's a good idea to tell them where you're going. That's one definition of leadership. Messengers. I know you've been walking with that slate card and talking to people. I need you to keep doing that. I need you to talk to all voters and say, did you know? Take some of our cards, whatever it is. The best voter guide, even though my campaign is part of the Howard Jarvis taxpayer mailing and the tax limitation mailing, which went, you know how many pieces went out? 6.4 million pieces were recently mailed out. That's a huge percentage. If we got all those votes, we'd be in the top 2. But the best voter guide is you, because your friends know you and they know your values. And I need you to talk to 10 or 20 people, because if we all did that, we would get in the top 2, and we have to be in the top 2. You know, if we don't have someone in the top 2, there's no one statewide, and that kills off the opportunity for younger candidates. I'm assuming I'm older than you. I'm 54. What are you, 29?
Oh, ouch, thank you. But 38.
38, not 28. That was a good thing coming from me, right? If we don't have one at the top, people stay at home. They figured the voting statistics are real. People vote at the top of the ballot, and by the end, it falls off dramatically. And if they don't have someone to come out for the top of the ticket, then they don't show up at all, and that definitely hurts the bottom. So, I also, you see some envelopes here. It turns out this is a really big state. I've been traveling it for years, but the cost is considerable, whether it's Southwest, hotels, or buying these by the truckload. Because we get asked for thousands of these a week, and we print them up and that kind of thing. So please talk to your friends. Please put something in those envelopes to help me out, defer these costs. Let's get in the top 2. And more than anything else, let's stand up and say something, because that's when Californians will notice us. I'm Tom Beccaro. Thank you very much. Question, you have to donate though. Yes, sir. He went ahead with it. Silence is acceptance. Bruce, what can I answer for you?
I'd like to be the devil's advocate for a moment. You know, we've got, roughly registration, about 27% Republicans in the state. Used to be a hell of a lot more, as we all know. The Hispanic vote, Hispanic population, I should say, is roughly...
It's in the 40s, and they're expected to vote around 25% of the electorate.
Now, my question to you is, with those numbers, and particularly if 25% of the Hispanics vote. You know, with some people, and I was with a group the other night, one of the ladies was Hispanic, I mentioned the Republican, I might as well call her a son of a bitch. Okay? So, that was just one person. But excuse me for my French, but, my concern is, how are you gonna approach that?
Yeah, okay, thank you.
We can't ignore that vote.
We can't ignore that vote. In fact, the electorate is changing all the time. And when I was state party chair, I used to tell Republicans very simply, you have to change, you have to talk to the existing customers. You know, when you get a mailer from your local grocery store, right? You get that? You know what it says on it? It says your name or, that's right. Because they expect you to do terrible things like move, die, wander into the wrong store. And so they keep sending that mail to this person, current resident, that I've never seen, right? So we must begin to talk to the people that exist. So when I was state party chairman, I did something that no one had ever done before. And the establishment told me I wouldn't be able to do it. I was the sixth of 8 children. If I only did what I was told to do, I'd still be in my room somewhere. And then they told me don't try it because it'll blow up. And what am I referring to? We did the first ever Latino town hall on Univision that played statewide. Who was there?
I was there.
There you were. It was me in the center of about 200 Latinos, not just from our party. And we held a discussion. And Univision won an Emmy. And then we did another. And then the RNC did it. Because you have to talk to people. And you know that Latinos, their top 4 issues are the economy, healthcare, education, public safety. Does any of this sound familiar? Yes. And if you don't talk to them, I tell people all the time, who would you rather borrow sugar from? A friend or a stranger? Everybody says friend, right? That's really microcosm for politics. If you have no relationship with somebody, they may intuitively agree with you, but if you have no relationship and you don't reach them, you're not. So when Univision did their candidate series just recently, they picked the top 3. They picked Harris, Sanchez, and I was the only Republican. And so 31% of Univision's voters, and Univision LA is what? The largest television station in the world. 31% of their voters self-identify as Republican, their viewers. So the answer to your question is you've got to show up and be there. And I've done that as best I can. If I had a lot more money, we would do a lot more. Yes, sir.
People walking around doing their door knocking for John Hart. The Republican was not Republicans had no vote. And some of the things I've been hearing, and some of the things not only from them, but just in the media in general, is how disheartened and disappointed Republican voters are because they feel they've been let down by the people that they voted for.
Yeah.
How do you convince people that you are different and that when they vote for you, they won't be let down?
Okay, good question. Why should you believe me? Is that what you just asked?
Yeah, I mean, believe everybody else.
No, it's okay. It's an okay question. Okay?
Well, can I just add to this question, because I was about to...
Is this an amendment to the question?
My question is that you sound really good in everything you've said, but a lot of people go to Washington and not that. I don't know.
Yeah. So here's the way you should look at someone. If someone is running and they use the word I a lot, or I want a lot, or they're running for the office a lot, without a specific plan, it's a good idea. You can probably recognize what their focus is. They have ambition to be somebody. Look for someone, if you can find them in any particular race, who's been working on a particular issue in their lifetime, and that's what motivates them. And I've been for a flat tax going on 35 years. I've been for tax reform since I was 18, because I recognized it. And a lot of these views that I have, sure, my water policy is fairly new, although I always knew that the government was bottling it up, pun intended, on purpose, or sending 50% out to the ocean, right? So look for someone in that regard. Then the other thing you should look for is whether they have any strategy at all related to being there. Because a lot of people just go to be backbenchers and go along. One of my biggest problems with Republicans in general in Washington and Sacramento is they don't invigorate the American people to get them on their side in any one particular issue. They wind up arguing with the Washington Post and don't do anything about it. Worst example recent was Planned Parenthood. Those videos changed everything. The whole discussion. People saw for the first time really what Planned Parenthood was about. And they were agitated. And then Mitch McConnell said, what? Well, there's not enough votes right now. Okay, go drum up support. The American people are upset. So what they should have done is left Washington, really exposed what's going on. This applies to everything. And then put the pressure. When Rudy Giuliani was elected mayor of New York, the city council was, I think at the time, 49 people. And there were only 4 or 5 Republicans and 43 Democrats, I think. That's a pretty uphill climb, right? But how was he successful? Because every time he wanted to press an issue, you know what he would do? He'd hold a press conference. And he spoke directly to voters through the TV. And he put the pressure on, regardless of the issue. And he got the electorate behind him, and the city council changed. You know who's good at that? Ronald Reagan. Do you remember when he used to go on TV if an issue mattered enough? Remember, what was his nickname? The Great? Yes, because he actually used the tool. So, I'm not going to Washington to hang out with those people. I don't even like the cold that much. You'll see me here. I think we should have a statewide water conference in March or April of next year. You'll see me outside their circles trying to drum up support on particular issues. So the difference with me is, I'm not going to fight 35 years for a flat tax and suddenly decide a bumpy tax is good. So find someone who cares and runs and does things based on issues as opposed to resume, and that's a good indication. All right, yes?
I just want to add something in that I heard Tom about 6 years ago on a couple of occasions. And as I said to you, Linda, if he is the same person tonight as he was then, this man has my loyalty and my vote. And I'm hearing him tonight, and I will tell you this, he has not changed. He's been carrying the story over and over.
Yes?
I have a budget question. When they're talking about the federal budget and the huge deficit, one of the things that usually goes with it is, in effect, the budget is being consumed by entitlements, Social Security and Medicare and now Obamacare and all of that. And it basically, there's a cliche about the pension fund that ate California. Well, the same thing's going on at the federal level. And politically, you can't just take that stuff away at this point. So what's your answer to all of that?
Good. Like with a lot of issues, economic growth is key. At 1.7%, we probably have 15 years before we get in severe crisis, only being able to pay Social Security, Medicare, interest on the debt, and some defense. So we must get from 1.6 to 3.5 to fund things long term. That's number one. Look, it's simple enough. The Republicans should be about reforming government and sending it back to the states instead of collecting money in a centralized. They should be fixing the VA and making it and streamlining it and making it more cost efficient. They should be fixing the post office, so get it down to a smaller size as well. Eventually, we have to look about how we deliver Social Security. 25 years from now, the average or the mortality rate will be up for men will be above 80, and for women, certainly above 80. Should we have the same exact system that FDR came in when the age was 63? No. So we're going to reach a point where either we're going to stop, I have fear, we're going to stop funding it because we are so run out of money, or we get wise enough and say if you started work in the year 2017, then you're going to have a different system, thank you, than we do today. Than you do today, the current enrollees. Or we end up like Detroit, which woke up in January of 2013, didn't have the money for paying for stuff, and they stopped paying for stuff. So economic growth is key. We're going to have to make changes long-term to the system to reflect that people are living far longer. And we're going to have to also decide that government doesn't have to be the employer of all kinds. It may be that we have a system that helps veterans, of course, but we don't have to have that system be the one that hire all the janitors or all the people who produce certain things. We may have a system where private hospitals have a much greater role than existing VA hospitals. We're going to have to look at all of those things. Yeah, you've been waiting. Go ahead. Kathy, I'll get to you.
We have a system today where our candidates,
Yeah.
on the Democrat side, promise all kinds of rewards and benefits to various constituencies.
Yeah.
And this is what attracts great numbers of people, or attracts them to their party. And they know full well they can't deliver on all those things.
Yeah.
So what's really disturbing to me is that Bernie Sanders can come up with a plan and get all of these college students and say, well, you're going to have free education, you know, and the $1.3 trillion of student debt means nothing. It's going to be free, and can fool all of these people continuously. How do you fight this giveaway mentality and this take mentality?
Yeah. A couple of things in that regard. First of all, that was my first political lesson. One of the first I remember getting from my father in the 60s, where he said the Democrats have it made. They're convincing people they can vote themselves rich. This is exactly what's going on right now. You have to wait for this. Historically, you wait for the circumstance to change so that you can reach enough people. And we have a lot of 20-somethings without jobs. They were lied to. They were told that there'd be jobs and they'd have health care. Instead, they wind up being forced to get health care to subsidize me at 54. There should be nobody in their 20s paying money to subsidize my health care. I'm the one with money now. I've been working 30 years. They shouldn't do that. So there's the opening. It's the same opening Reagan used when I was 18 for many people. So that's key. That's number one. And since they're jobless, they're looking for an alternative. Now, I personally view, and I don't talk about this a lot publicly, but I'll say it to you now. I think it's going to be incredibly easy to be a Republican president if you are the next Republican president. It's going to be so easy to do the job. What you do is you go in. Remember, we have this division and weak economy which come in the same train, hand in hand. All he really has to do is tax reform, some regulatory reform, and the economy will do better. We have the long-term growth problems, but it'll get above 3.5%. And employment will grow significantly if they do this. They have to stand up a little bit more as president of the United States when it comes to international affairs. That doesn't mean that they commit troops around the world. They do need to rebuild some of the military. We shouldn't be at 1941 troop levels by any measure. But once the economy gets going again, and people feel a little bit better about their future, this is an opportunity like Reagan had to win over another generation with a private sector job instead of just the right to complain. So if we elect a good president who follows a really simple roadmap, we're going to make progress on that. But remember, as Jefferson said, the natural order of things is for liberty to decline in the face of ever larger government, and we must fight it all the time. But we're going to get a good pendulum swing here, and we need to make the most of it. One more. I got to go to Kath. Well, maybe two more. But Kathy, you go ahead. Go ahead.
So my passion is city planning.
Yes.
And every day we're getting hit with more HUD regulations.
Sure.
And Obama's Affirmatively Fair Housing Act. He's telling the cities where we have to put apartments, how high they have to be, where they have to be. Now we have a whole new set of regulations that just came down from Brown today. None of the counties want to talk about the HUD issue.
I'll talk about it with you. First of all, I'm forever indebted to Kathy. How many of my things have you handed out?
2,000.
2,000. Let's give her a round of applause. So obviously, I don't believe the federal government or even the state government should be choosing where you live, who your neighbors should be, or how many houses of a particular type that you should have. So that's just, they have enough trouble keeping us safe, San Bernardino style, and they're not doing that. They should put the money into that. I'm one who supports the notion that any regulation costing the economy as a whole over 200 million needs a congressional approval, and it can't be done through executive order or the fourth estate known as our bureaucracy. That will slow them down. I'm one that says that any law passed in Congress should be a single subject matter law. That will slow them down. But to change HUD and the like, you need a new president. Someone who believes that all existing regulations should go through a cost-benefit analysis every 5 years, let's say, and be adjusted that way as well. By the way, people ask me all the time when I think about term limits, which would require a constitutional amendment, which takes a long time. We're at 27 now. Does anyone know when the 27th Amendment was introduced? 1789. That's a long way. We can't wait that long. But if you want them to leave, then I hope you'll join me in saying that no member of Congress nor senator should get a pension from Congress or from us. Because they stay there a long time, breaking up that pension, and they should be sent home to live under the laws that they create. So one last one in the corner.
Oh, hello. I have actually two quick questions. One of them was, can you address the gas situation here in California? Because I think we're paying one of the highest gas prices.
Yes, we are.
And plus we have a lot of gas reserves here, and address that. Also, you mentioned about Cash for Clunkers, one of the incentive programs that the Democrats, but wouldn't you say that, thinking back, that helped all the automakers, Chrysler, to come back because it was the...
Yeah, thank you very much. Let's go with the first one, the second one first.
Okay.
In economics, we talk about secondary effects or collateral effects. So the primary effect is usually pretty visible because it's whatever the law is designed to treat. And then the media hardly ever the residual effects. The easiest example is the minimum wage. If I give this table the minimum wage, the initial effect is to think that these people all get more money. The collateral or secondary effects is me having less money, right? So now my economy has shrunk. Theirs has gone up, except for Melissa lost her job, so her economy goes way down, and maybe Tony is now put on part-time. But they focus on saying that occurred. When it comes to a bill like Cash for Clunkers, what you're doing is simply taking you're taking money from some people and creating a different economic effect that benefits this narrow group and then reduces all of these people's economy, so they buy less shoes, so the shoemaker gets less money, they go to less doctors, so they get less money, and on and on and on. So the economy as a whole was not lifted by cash for clunkers. In fact, they did a study that over time, remarkably few cars were actually sold that wouldn't have been sold anyway. Now, and again, I'm against corporate welfare. It doesn't matter to me whether we have 4 car makers or 5. We need efficient car makers that aren't insulated and aren't giving too much away. You know, I don't know if you remember, you should have been really angry when Obama said the CEO of X company should leave. Do you remember that? And they actually did. That's a bad circumstance. It's no different than HUD. It's no different than telling you what bathroom should be used, right, at the federal level. As far as energy, our energy policy is easily the dumbest policy America has had over the last 50 years. We are the first civilization in history, major power, the first, that funds directly those who are harming us. The first thing that England and France did when they fought over the centuries was cut off trade with each other. They didn't want to enrich each other. What did, after we declared our independence, what was the first thing England did? They cut off trade with us. We, for decades, have been trading with the Middle East, enriching them, and then Saudi Arabia does what? Funds more of the terror. So our energy policy has been to deny our own resources, send money overseas, which had these collateral economic effects: less jobs for us, higher energy prices, higher Department of Defense costs, because we needed more defense because of all the problems that we had to fight, which shrank the economy overall. If we had developed our own energy resources, the Middle East would be much poorer, like it is when we used to have the shale boom. You know why Iran did the nuclear deal? Because oil fell from 140 to about 40, and they needed the cash to pay for the troops that they had on the ground to create Middle East dominance. We'll do the nuclear thing next decade. Right now we need to pay for these troops. So our energy policy could have been develop our own resources, employ our own people, have an expanded economy, and then we wouldn't have had to pay so much in defense. That would have gone down, and things would be much better. We need to, as a matter of national security, we need to continue to develop our own resources. One last thing I want to say about this has to do with climate change and the like.
I was talking about California.
California, well, it's even a worse example. So let's put those together. The reason why California has the second highest gas prices in the country, and you're from New York, right?
Yes.
What part?
Brooklyn.
Brooklyn. Okay, I'm originally from New York. And where's the other gentleman from? There he is. I don't talk like this anymore. You know, I could talk like this. I don't think it's very becoming, do you? No. I tell people the only time I talk like this is when I'm caught in a dark alley and I made a mistake. No. My mother would be hitting me right now. She's probably saying that publicly. Chicago has, the city of Chicago, you know, literally, the city ends here, you see that gas price and go right outside it. Very much different. Let me tell you, collateral effects in economics. So we have the strictest global warming law in the world. 25 years ago, we had 2.2 million manufacturing jobs in this state and about 700,000 government jobs. Now we have about 800,000 manufacturing jobs and over 2 million government jobs. Now where did those jobs, where did they go? A lot of them went to China. A lot of them went to India, where they do what? Wantonly pollute. So the collateral effect of the political law economically, when it was designed to reduce pollution, has actually increased pollution in the short term and even in the long term. Because if those jobs had been left here, we would have a burgeoning industry of technical abilities related to cleaner energy production and cleaner manufacturing production. And we would be 25 years ahead than where we are, because we sent it overseas. And then what would happen? Well, you know, when a technology first comes out, it's more expensive, right, than at the end. We would be selling that technology to the rest of the world, and long term, not only would that be jobs here, but long term it would reduce pollution dramatically worldwide. So now you should judge a law by its realities, not by its intention. So we should have done the opposite, kept it here. So these global warming laws that we pass here are actually making pollution worse long term than if we had kept it here. And that's the kind of thing, you need someone in Washington who actually can talk to people about these things and understand. So remember our education levels now. When I was in high school, we took Latin. Now we're teaching kids remedial English in college, right? That tells you something. We used to talk to people about home ec. And economics is now this dark subject that no one seems to understand or care about in Washington. If we're going to win our prosperity back, we must have a national discussion and have everyone at every level. We need to then seize upon a growing economy to get people to understand this. See, this is how it works. We go to Washington. We shrink the Department of the IRS because we have tax reform. We have less people in government, and we did better. That is what we should push in for. That's why I hope you walk precincts for me, and thank you very much for inviting me.
Hi, I'm Judy Neal, and I am the president of the Mountain View Republican Club. And tonight we were lucky enough to hear from Tom Del Beccaro, who is running for U.S. Senate in the state of California. And he is one of the top runners. This is a man that we have followed for a long time. He was formerly the chairman of our California Republican Party. This is a man who hasn't changed his ideas. He hasn't changed his stance. He knows what he believes in. And that's what 90% of the people believe in. And I think it's imperative that we get behind this man and we vote Tom Del Beccaro for U.S. Senate. Only the top two get to advance into the general. And we have got to ensure that one of those people is Tom Del Beccaro. Thank you, and vote Tom Del Beccaro.